Cultists of the Mythos, what the hell is their problem? If we as humans in the context of the Mythos think of opposing forces and threats to our existence, we think of the great old ones who, though think nothing much of us, would cause untold havoc on Earth when they arise again. However, there is a lesser force that is against our existence, one coming from our own kind. Cultists.
Modern and fear books.
It would seem to be obvious that no human should want to assist the great old ones, or to seek their revival, or to assist non-human entities such as the Deep Ones or the Migo. Doing so is to invite doom onto us all. Yet in Lovecraft's stories there are people from around the world who found their own deranged reasons for going against their own kind. And frankly, what the hell is their problem? In this video I'd like to look at these people, from the members of cults like the Cthulhu cult to the esoteric order of Dagon, and perhaps the bizarre individuals such as the decayed Wilbur Whateley and his family. So let's get into it. Do cultists know more than the protagonists of Lovecraft's tales? Lovecraft was never shy of putting his own kind, that being the Anglo-Saxon New Englander, at the pinnacle of civilization, refinement, and life. All the fine professors, students, artists, and explorers he created as protagonists seem to come from this ethnic stock, mostly because it represented himself and his people, and Lovecraft very often inserted himself into his tales. If it makes sense, you could say that an Italian version of Lovecraft would usually write his stories with an Italian protagonist. That's what I'm saying. Yet it is these same protagonists who are less informed about what's really happening in the world compared to the members of cults in his tales, or the random collection of bizarre individuals around the world such as the Whateleys from the Dunwich Horror. The cultists and people like the wizard Whateley, despite always being described by Lovecraft in horrible, unflattering terms, know more about what's going on than the fine New Englander protagonists in the same story. It is only later they discover the reality of things. So what does it imply if these same protagonists are dumbfounded by the horrors they later discover, yet the horrors are known to the cultists he often referred to as degenerates, decadent, mongrels, and so on? Personally, I think that Lovecraft made his protagonists initially ignorant only to discover horrible truths later, as this is the key turning point of a weird tale, when the horror sets in for the first time and thus is the most potent in effect. I would also argue that Lovecraft's own personal situation played a role. Like many of his characters, he is a well-bred, intelligent New Englander, but Lovecraft saw horror in life, in the human condition. He often described life in either his tales or in his personal letters with disdain. Is it not then fitting? Lovecraft, the refined New Englander, sees the horror in existence, and thus so do his characters, who often are cut from the same cloth as himself. Is it that simple though, to say cultists are wiser than the protagonists? It occurred to me that it's very likely that the cultists, while having knowledge of the great old ones, something that the regular people of the world generally lack, may be working on a lot of assumptions and limited human knowledge and understanding, made even more prone to error due to the bizarre and incomprehensible nature of what the cultists tend to worship. If we look at old Castro, the aged mestizo cultist from the Call of Cthulhu, he implies the great old ones will come and teach humanity new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves. Why? Why would they do this? It seems to be wishful thinking on the parts of the believers of the Cthulhu cult. It's like trying to teach fine dining to ants or microbes. Why bother? Looking at the real-world religions and cults, we see that believers tend to think that the entities or deities they worship are on their side when times become hard on earth. The religious person, especially the devout ones, tend to think a certain way, regardless of the religion. Why should the cultists of the Mythos have a different mentality? Surely the ardent atheist Lovecraft wouldn't see much of a difference and modeled his cults on real-world religions and religious behavior. In other words, it seems fair to say that a cultist, probably not the most stable person anyways, and we'll get into that point later, is going to think that they are special and to be saved in the end. Surely they realize how horrific these mythos entities are, but they, the cultists, are special and will be saved when the judgment day comes. A quote from Winston Churchill comes to mind. An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile, hoping it will eat him last. Perhaps that's also the case. So are the cultists actually the ones who are really red-pilled about the world that Lovecraft creates in his stories? Well, to the extent of simply knowing of the existence of such nameless entities, yes. But all that other stuff, like thinking that when Cthulhu awakens he's going to give a damn about these tiny hominids, I severely doubt that. That's human wishful thinking added on. What are their motivations, these cultists? So now comes the question, What the hell is wrong with these people? Why do they worship entities which would destroy humanity as we know it by simply existing on Earth? Why would they sacrifice themselves and a moral way of living for their perverse ways such as brutal voodoo orgies? To answer this question, we have to think outside our own logic and reasoning. Given that they usually seek out outcomes which either directly or indirectly lead to humanity getting wrecked, and since they're technically part of humanity, these cultists, they're human beings, what could motivate them? Various reasons exist, and some of them are quite banal and ordinary. Power would be one reason. Perhaps not power in human society, but as the cultist would see it, power in the big picture. They see how insignificant and small humanity is in the long run, thus themselves by implication, since they're also human, and think it is better to side with the great old ones, or another race, like the deep ones, or the Migo, or just the side they think will come out winning in the end. This kind of logic is not foreign to humanity.
You heard cue ball, right? Pretty soon they're all gonna be daywalkers, man. When that happens, I'd rather be a pet than cattle. You got me, B?
Other reasons for joining the cults of the Mythos? Well, simply look to reality. Cults of the world do tend to appeal to those who are lost in the world, lack direction, or mentally or emotionally unstable. Not saying that if you're religious, this describes you. There are many fine reasons for being religious, I know that. I'm no Dawkins worshipping atheist here. I simply say that a person who, in life, is feeling lost or unsure of themselves, wanting answers and solutions, is more prone to the words of some silver-tongued individual promising truths and a better reality. A cult would provide a sense of meaning, give explanations as to how the world is, and also provide solutions. Perhaps it would give the cultist a feeling of superiority over the dumb sheep, the rest of humanity, as they would see us. It should also be kept in mind that some cultists may simply be insane, lunatics. They're already mentally deranged people. Such people would be low-hanging fruits for the cult leaders to recruit. We see such examples in fiction as well, for example in The Dark Knight, where the Joker preyed on the insane people.
Please, my insides hurt.
I don't really care. Back away.
The boss said he'd make the voices go away. He said he'd go inside and replace them with bright lights. Like Christmas.
Robert M. Price pointed out in his introductory piece, Cult of the Ghouls, which can be found in this book, that some cults could use the promise of baser rewards to recruit members. We have to imagine these low-class ruffians being recruited with promises of girls, booze, money, and prizes. They are stupid enough to believe that they will one day rule the world in the name of the cult if they will do its dirty work now. They will have been fed drugs, sex, and alcohol with promises of much more. It can also be a different story. Perhaps once one becomes red-pilled about the existence of such entities and forces on Earth, it can happen that one is drawn to cults to find more answers from those who seem to have more knowledge on the matter. Frankly, who else could you talk to in the scenario? Look at the protagonist of Dagon, who seeks to discuss what he experienced. Even the experts he consulted thought he was crazy. He was driven to suicide finally, but what if some figure came to him and invited him to learn more, to learn the truth, or plied him with drugs, manipulated him? It is all very plausible. Robert M. Price lists this as a reason as well, specifically in the case of the Church of Starry Wisdom. The cult wanted knowledge, alien knowledge, by use of that shining jewel locked up in that church tower as we see in the story. Nothing inherently malicious, but reckless rather. Then finally you can say that the cultists are just outsiders who find nothing for themselves in the system which is humanity and desire to tear it down. They may see that they have nothing to lose really and feel resentment to life. A modern day equivalent? Look at the subhuman hordes known as Antifa and the way they seek to destroy and burn and smash for no reason except to do so. To us it seems sick, but to these vile rats it's completely rational. The racial aspect of cults. I'm aware that there is some talk amongst critics of Lovecraft, and I'm not just talking about those soy-soaked idiots on Twitter, that cultists are used by Lovecraft in his stories to represent a bias against non-whites, thus implying that cultists are inevitably non-whites. This is completely incorrect. Robert M. Price, who I just quoted, is guilty of the same assumption too. The actual reality is that Lovecraft did not paint all whites as being inherently the good guys of his stories. Nor did he paint cults as wholly representative of ethnic or national groups he disliked in reality. Numerous times in Lovecraft's weird tales, non-white ethnic groups have been just as vehemently opposed to cults as the protagonists of New England heritage, that being Lovecraft's own blood. In The Haunter of the Dark, the cult is started apparently by a professor with a very Anglo-Saxon sounding name, Enoch Bowen, in an area of the city where many Italians lived. Lovecraft, who really did not care for Italians that much to say the least, had the Italians living in the same area be violently opposed to the cult, calling the cult
satanic black magic, sick shit, fucking quiz!
Thanks, Paulie. In the Call of Cthulhu, the swamp denizens, though of dubious ethnic backgrounds, are not all morally united in the idol worship, and the non-worshippers of the Cthulhu idol are disgusted and horrified by those that take part in the worship and beg for the police to help. In the same story, an example is given of Eskimos, where one tribe of Eskimos is shunned and considered evil by those of their own ethnic kind for the worship of the Cthulhu idol. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, the Kanakys mentioned early in the story, who traded and perhaps worshipped the Deep Ones, are wiped out by others of their own ethnic group. Of course, in the same story, the same divide was seen in the citizens of the towns surrounding Innsmouth, presumably all European in blood, who hated and shunned the Innsmouth town in totality, including those in it. In the Dunwich Horror, the story speaks of the various presumably white families of Dunwich, divided between those who are quote-unquote decayed and those who are not. The decayed families are shunned and looked down upon by the undecayed families to various degrees. Further pointing out the stupidity of such critics is the fact that we see white cultists and figures shown as being repugnant. Joseph Curwen from the case of Charles Dexter Ward is depicted as evil and abhorrent from his descendants' perspective. The Delapour family and the Martense family, as well as Robert Soyden, all of Dutch origins and thus white, are painted as highly degenerate in the stories The Rats in the Walls, The Lurking Fear, and The Horror at Red Hook respectively. Thus, it seems clear to me that the average cultist or wizard archetype of Lovecraft's stories have no inherent racial aspects at all. In numerous stories, members of the cultists' own ethnic or racial groups can and do find the doings and beliefs of the cultists repugnant to the point of wanting to destroy them. Were a cult to rise up in any country or ethnic region, it seems that per the norms of the average Lovecraft story, there would be people of the same ethnic group wanting to oppose the cults, and rightly so. This completely destroys the criticism that Lovecraft put non-whites as existing on a baser level, as Robert M. Price put it. What is to be done about cultists? That's the question. When these cults are discovered by the authorities, as we see in The Shadow over Innsmouth and The Call of Cthulhu, should we just let them be and tolerate their beliefs, though it will surely come at the detriment of humanity eventually? Given how Western society and governments are now, this would probably be the case. Thank God we're talking about stories set many decades ago. Should we take into consideration many may be insane and thus legally not responsible for their actions? What about the perspectives of the victims of the cultists and their families? They'd want justice, and how do you set up a covert legal system to deal with these cultists in a court of law without having to explain to the judge that Yog-Sothoth exists and that's why we need to prosecute these people?
We don't do cases like that because it's ridiculous.
Perhaps a secret government organization that exists outside of the law is needed, given that this threat to humanity goes beyond mere human terms and laws. Kind of like in Hellboy, there was that group that fought against the dark elements of the world. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, the government feds raid Innsmouth and lock up the mixed-race denizens of Innsmouth. But what then? What do you do with them? I will leave you to decide an opinion on what is best to do regarding cultists, though I'm all for throwing dynamite at them, or napalm. So, in conclusion, these are my thoughts about the cultists, the cults, and the bizarre human elements of the mythos. Typically, when reading the tales of the old gentlemen of Providence, we dwell on the big bad entities like Yog-Sothoth, Cthulhu, or the alien races who could wreck us in an instant, like the Migo. But the cultist question is quite interesting, isn't it? They've come close at times to causing immense harm to humanity. What if Wilbur Whatley and his grandfather's attempts worked? What if they succeeded? Would our race even exist anymore? So what do you make of the cultists? Are they actually wiser and more in the loop regarding the truths of the universe? Or are they simply deranged and mistaken? Is it better to try and side with the entities of the mythos in some hopes that you survive the end of the human race when the time comes? Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'm really curious because I'm also in the grey area about what to do about cultists. Thanks for lending me your time, and I'd appreciate it if you could give this video a like and help it boost it in the algorithm. You know, I haven't made a theoretical video in a very long time, and I'm glad I finally made one. I really hope you guys like it, and yeah, I'll see you in the comment section. See you guys, and I hope you're having a great day. Cheers.
Hello? May I speak to Mr. Josh? First name Hugh.